I think we are live. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Scuba.Digital live show. Today, I'll be talking to you a little bit about whale sharks and about the Adelaar tagging project in collaboration with Conservation International. Mathilde from Adelaar will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, pop them in there and we'll either answer them directly or after the presentation. So firstly, I wanted to start off with a little bit about me and my background. My name is Mads, and I am a tropical marine biologist, an underwater photographer, podcaster, and founder of non-profit organization Women in Ocean Science, and as I like to call myself, an advocate for the natural world. So I've got quite a diverse background in conservation. My master's thesis was in bioacoustics, which is essentially the soundscape of the ocean, and the way that we as humans are altering it. But alongside that, I've also been very lucky to have the chance to work with a variety of tropical marine life, which has included elasmobranchs, the sharks and rays of the world. So though I've spent the last few years advocating for the protection of sharks and their conservation, my love for these creatures hasn't been as eternal as most would assume it would be. Growing up in England, here you can see me in the sea in South England this summer, a gorgeous shade of brown. I really didn't know very much about sharks. And what I did know was from the media that I consumed, whether it was films or news articles or books. And as you can imagine, as by the likes of things such as Jaws, this actually led me to being quite afraid of sharks, even up until the point when I first learned to dive in my late teens. I actually remember before I headed out to Cuba to get my open water scuba qualification, I was actually Googling the history of shark attacks in the Caribbean. That's how little I knew about sharks, even as someone who dreamed of being a marine biologist. And all these years later, I've actually learned that what I really should have been Googling was Cuban crocodiles, because they are definitely way more scary. Anyway, as it turned out during this trip, I didn't see a single shark in the water. The first two sharks I actually ever saw were dead. And unfortunately, this is a theme that has perpetuated throughout my career this far as a marine biologist and as a scuba diver. Fast forward a few years, and as an early career marine biologist, I am a little wiser about sharks now. And like most of us here today, I have become totally obsessed with them, and spend a lot of my time now speaking out for them and their protection and conservation. And this brings us onto the species that I am here to talk to you about today, what I consider to be the most gorgeous shark, and it's also the biggest of all fish in the sea, the whale shark. So let's get on to a bit about the history and the biology of these guys that you've come to hear me talk about today, not to ramble on about myself. So is it a shark? Is it a whale? Well, it's definitely a shark. The whale part actually just refers to the size of the thing. The shark is the world's largest fish and can grow up to around 18 meters long, though the average is about 14, and weighs on average around 25 tons, which is more than your average school bus. And yes, in true girl power fashion, female whale sharks grow even larger than the males. And to put this into perspective on the scale of different shark sizes, the great white shark actually grows quite a lot less. I think it's about 6 meters less, at about 6 meters or 20 feet long. And it was previously thought to be even, the whale sharks were even bigger than the long extinct megalodon shark. But actually this has been kind of disproved because a paper that came out just last month actually reconstructed the megalodon shark in 2D, and it puts the megalodon around 5 meters larger. But the whale shark is still up there with one of the biggest sharks, well, the second biggest shark to ever have lived. But whale sharks, alongside other sharks and rays, are cartilaginous fish. And this means that their skeleton is made up of cartilage, the stuff that as humans we find in our noses and in our ears, rather than bones. And this is what forms the group of elasmobranchs. So this actually means that studying prehistoric sharks and rays and really learning about their history is quite difficult, because the cartilaginous soft skeletons of these fish don't preserve quite as well as bone. So instead, paleontologists have to rely on studying teeth for a window into their past. And this is why there has been some dispute as to the size of the megalodon and other shark species in the past. And talking about the history of whale sharks, these are incredibly old creatures that have been around for a very, very long time. And when you consider just how long they've been around for, it is incredibly distressing when you look at the current rate of fishing and what this means for their future longevity. The ancestry of this shark, the whale shark, dates back to around the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods of around 250 million years ago, although sharks have been around for a little bit longer than that, when the earliest fossil dates back to around 400 million years ago. But 250 million is the kind of shark that we, know of today. That's when that started to come around. So their past is a bit of a mystery, and unfortunately, they're still a bit of an enigma today. Whale sharks, we actually know very little about them. We're not sure where they mate. We don't know how interconnected global populations are, and we have no idea where they give birth. We do know that they are ovoviviparous, which means that they have a very cool mode of reproduction, which means they hatch young from eggs internally within the mama, and then she gives birth to live young. And around 300 at a time, which is mad. But it's only thought that around 10% of these pups will survive. And the pups come out around 1/2 meter long, but they are rarely seen in the wild. They are rarely seen in the ocean. And we know very, very little about their early life and what they get up to. So now let's talk a little bit about feeding. Though whale sharks are indeed carnivores, it often comes as a shock to many people that whale sharks are filter feeders and feed on some of the tiniest creatures in the ocean. Whale sharks are one of only 3 filter feeding sharks, the megalodon that I just mentioned, and the basking shark. So these are the 3 biggest shark species in the ocean, and they all are filter feeders. And the latter, basking sharks, can actually be found in the waters around the UK, which I tried and failed to successfully locate during my staycation back in the UK this year because of COVID, but hopefully next year. So what is a filter feeder? Here we have a video of a whale shark going along and gulping some water. Filter feeders are a group of suspension feeding animals, which means that they feed by straining food particles from the water, specifically by passing water over their gills, over a specialized filtering structure, essentially like a giant sieve. And as you can see here in the second video, whale sharks do this exceptionally well by swimming along with their mouths open and gulping in that water. They scoop up all the tiny particles in the water, passively feeding on everything in their path. This diet consists of plankton, which includes copepods, krill, which the blue whale feeds on, fish eggs, larvae, coral spawn, and small fish and anything else that's hanging around in that water column. So despite their giant size, whale sharks, food-wise, are harmless to humans, and are largely harmless to humans unless you happen to be swimming with them irresponsibly and get whacked by a tail. They actually do have hundreds of teeth, but they are super, super tiny and they don't use them. They just have a big, big mouth. So whale sharks are a charismatic species, and one of the things that they are pretty well known for is their gorgeous and rather striking pattern, this spotted pattern that covers their back and their sides. I myself can often be seen sporting a whale shark print every now and then in the water. But evolutionarily speaking, why did they develop complex coloration? Well, we're unsure. There is an element of camouflage, allowing them to blend into the dappled waters of their surroundings. But being so large now as a species, it's also could be that having evolved from bottom-dwelling sharks, that the camouflage kind of marking could potentially just be an evolutionary leftover. But either way, these spots aren't just a pretty pattern for us, because they form part of an incredibly useful tool in allowing us to track whale sharks, in that these spot patterns can be used to differentiate between individuals. Now, the old saying, a leopard never changes its spots, is certainly true for these sharks. as these spots can be used to identify between them, much like a human fingerprint. These sharks have the same spots for their entire life, the same as a manta ray. The underbelly of a manta ray, if we snap a picture of these spots, we're able to compare the photo to an existing database and determine which individual this is. And the really cool thing about this is that it also allows us to track individuals at different locations as they're photographed across the world. Now, this also provides us with a really great opportunity for everyone to get involved and for citizen science, because if you've ever taken a photograph of a whale shark, you can submit it to Wild Book for Whale Sharks at whaleshark.org, which will allow you to directly contribute to an effort to protect these animals. You put in your location data, you put in the photo, and scientists will be able to see if this whale has already been observed in the database. And if you're really lucky, you may even have bumped into a new whale shark, one that hasn't been identified before. So I took this video last year when I was out interning with Manta Trust as a research assistant in Bar Atoll in the Maldives. When we were out on the research boat, I popped the drone up scouting for mantas, and instead we came across a beautiful juvenile whale shark, one that had never been spotted before, and was subsequently added to the Maldives whale shark database. We also got to name him, which was pretty cool. In the photo here, though, this is actually another whale shark out in the Maldives, and that one, as you can see by the size comparison to the swimmers, he is actually a massive adult. So anyway, last year I was very fortunate to have had several more encounters with these gentle giants, a number of which were out in Indonesia. And many of these interactions with the whale sharks I've had to date would be what I would call flybys, essentially when by chance a whale shark pops out of the blue, says a quick hi, and then slowly disappears back into the blue. But in some places of the world, in certain seasons, whale shark congregations happen naturally, depending on food, other factors, and it can be easier in these locations to have a more prolonged interaction or to increase your chances of seeing them. But last year, I wanted to head out to a place that I had heard of while bouncing around Indonesia, where you could actually find whale sharks all year round. So I did a little bit of research, and this place was quite off the beaten track. You can see me sitting here in a scantily built, rather precarious treetop hut, and it's not a particularly touristy area, but we decided to give it a crack and head out into remote Indonesia to go and try and find this population. And a little while later, I found myself driving through the rainforest for several hours, deep into the land of no cell service, followed by an equally as long boat journey. And there we were in the heart of a remote, quiet bay, a bay that is rather special because it is home to a large population of these sharks. Now, what was special about this area, and it's not something that's endemic to this place specifically, you can find these all across Indonesia, is the many fishing platforms that dot across the nearshore waters. So these fishing platforms are referred to as baygans. You can see one here in the photograph, which use nets and lights for light fishing. So the baygans are floated out to the sea and they catch everything from fish to squid to shrimps. And these baygans can actually stay out at sea for many months, with their catch being shipped back to the shore via small boats that you can see moored up there. So at night, these nets are lowered to around 18 meters, and the floodlights on top of the poles illuminate the water to attract shoals of fish, specifically a small fish called ikan puri, or as we know them, bait fish. And then early in the morning, the nets are scooped up, pulled up to reveal tons of these fish. And as you can imagine, these tons of fish attract the whale sharks. So the whale sharks turn up. Here's me in the water at a baygan. The whale sharks turn up to feed on these fish and have also cleverly learned to suck the fish from the nets. So we have a little video here of a whale shark cruising at this is one of the nets when it's actually pulled up, and the whale shark's heading over there to check it out. Sometimes, though, these sharks actually even get stuck in the nets, although there is a silver lining to this, and we will come on to this a bit later. But unfortunately, having whale sharks sucking the fish out of your nets and getting stuck and caught is not optimal for fishing. And in the past, in certain areas of Indonesia, this has led to a rather bloody relationship between fishermen and sharks, bloody for the sharks rather than the fishermen. So now, in some cases, the fishermen actually feed the sharks with offcuts from their catch to keep them away from the nets, which is a massive improvement on the bloody relationship that they had. And now, in some places, there's actually an element of superstition where the sign of the sharks coming to your net implies a good catch. So, turned up at the Bagans, and when I'd heard rumours of 24/7, 365 days a year of whale sharks, to be honest, I hadn't quite believed it. As a marine biologist and wildlife photographer, my general rule of thumb is don't expect wildlife to be there, because it is wildlife and it simply doesn't have to turn up when we want it to. So with our pre-packaged disappointment at the ready, we took the boat out to the Bagans and was mind blown to immediately find 3 whale sharks there. That first day, I think we must have stayed in the water with the same 3 sharks for around 12 hours. And I think by the third day, which was a full moon, there were 7 that stayed all day long. And so this, of course, for me as a scientist, raised some pretty interesting questions on whether this behavior of feeding the sharks was altering the natural behavior of the whale sharks. Now, whale sharks naturally aggregate at several coastal sites, as I've said, for feeding, but they're actually primarily pelagic fish, meaning that they inhabit the open sea. They're also known to migrate over very, very large distances. So when you suddenly add in this factor of a man-made constant food resource, you've got to wonder if it affects if and how long they migrate for, how resident they are, and what impacts this could have on populations. To put this into perspective a little bit, whale sharks need to migrate for things like mating. They migrate when food is available in different places. So what we really want to know is how is feeding them? Is it domesticating them? Is it affecting them? And if you look at examples of places where whale sharks are hand-fed deliberately for entirely touristic purposes in the Philippines, they have year-round shark populations. A very interesting paper actually came out in 2017 about the residency patterns of the sharks at the Philippines at the feeding site in Oslob. But that is a story for another day. But if you're interested in that, I would recommend checking out that paper because it is very, very interesting. So someone who's actually looking at this and answering those questions that popped into my mind and doing that research on the Indonesian whale shark population at the moment is Dr. Mark Erdman from Conservation International, who is tagging these sharks and collecting data on their movements and their diving behavior. He actually recently published a paper on the migration and residency patterns of this very population, thanks to these tags. You can actually also track these whale sharks in real time on Conservation International's whale shark online tracker, which I think Mathilde will put in the comments for you if you want to go over and check that out. And in 2015, these scientists, Conservation International scientists in Indonesia, attached satellite transmitters to the dorsal topside fin of the whale sharks, something that had never been done before because the species had been too big to catch. Oh, if you could just go back a slide, sorry. So here we have a tagged whale shark here in the dorsal fin. So they've previously been too big to catch to put this kind of tag on. However, as I mentioned previously, the whale sharks sometimes get inadvertently caught in the fishermen's nets, which provides a really unique opportunity to tag them. And now local fishermen actually reach out to Conservation International scientists whenever a whale shark gets stuck. So why should we tag whale sharks? I don't really want to finish on a depressing note, but in truth, it doesn't look super good for whale sharks going forward. Whale sharks are currently endangered. Not only are they at risk of increased injury and death from boat propellers, both from tourist boats and fishing boats. When I was out in the Maldives last year, it's actually very rare to come across a whale shark that isn't covered in boat propeller scars. But more critically, they are threatened by the fishing industry, both as bycatch, which is the accidental catching of the species, but also as a targeted catch for their meat and liver and their fins for the shark fin trade. So this shark that you can see here in these pictures was caught in May 2014. And this is a little bit of an exceptional case because the fishermen in this case in China claimed to be unaware that the catch was illegal and endangered, and they claimed that they found it trapped within their fishing nets, but took it to market anyway, planned to sell it for between 10,000 and 20,000 yuan, which is about £1,000 to £2,000, at the wholesale market in Shaanxi before officials from the fisheries department stepped in. But as I said, this is a bit more of a unique case because they claim to have caught it accidentally. Whereas more disturbingly, in 2014, a processing factory in China was exposed by wildlife risk to be slaughtering whale sharks, namely 600 per year. And this is one factory, which really speaks to how critical time is in the preservation of this species, especially when we start to look at the estimations of global population numbers at the moment. And what makes this whole situation so much worse is that, unfortunately, like many elasmobranchs, it takes whale sharks a very long time to reach sexual maturity, which essentially means that they will not be able to reproduce fast enough to replace populations at the rate that they are being fished. So how does tagging factor into protecting whale sharks? Well, tagging data helps to drive legislation in protecting these species. By understanding whale sharks better, we can know where they need higher levels of protection and where populations can be better managed. We can better create marine protected areas. We can enforce that certain routes, whether it's for migration, whether it's for feeding or mating, to make sure that these areas are protected from fishing and the whale sharks can be properly conserved. So back to Adelaar, the liveaboard that I am presenting for today. In collaboration with Conservation International, we are launching a whale shark fundraiser called Go Tag Me. The money raised will be used to purchase tags and to host a tagging operation of Indonesian whale sharks aboard Adelaar. Now, tags are incredibly expensive, like most scientific equipment, with the average tag costing around $6,500. So this is not a cheap thing to do. And all tag donors will be invited to follow along on this adventure with us. The first donation to this project was made in memory of Neil Boltz and his partner Patricia. Avid divers, they were actually anticipating a Christmas trip on board Adelaar. And very, very sadly, Neil and Patricia tragically perished in the conception fire 3 months prior to their trip aboard Adelaar. And so we dedicate this first tag in which the donation was made by their families to them. And we invite you to support our conservation project with a donation. So I'd like to thank you all so much for listening today. It has been really, really wonderful to have the opportunity to speak to you about whale sharks and about their preservation and their conservation. And if you have any questions at all, please drop me a message in the chat and I will try my best to answer them. And if you'd like to hear me speak more about sharks, I actually run a podcast called Ocean Poddy, where I talk, where I talk more about sharks and about other issues in marine conservation with a little bit of a lighthearted twist. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Hit me with your questions. Is there anywhere that I can see? Just looking. looking in the chat. Matilda's posting. Thanks, guys, for everyone who commented. You can also find me on Instagram at mads_ocean, as it's up on the screen there. Just looking in the chat to see if there are any questions. Oh, interesting. I've just got one saying about a population in the Sea of Cortez. Yeah, there is actually a population out there as well, which has been studied for a really, really long time, as Greg has just messaged me. So thanks, Greg, for sending that in. Oh, that's interesting about the calving ground. I know that there's a ground where they see a lot of juvenile sharks, but I'm not sure about if we know exactly where they calve. But the best person to ask about that, I think, would probably be the Galapagos Whale Shark Project, who study, or Migramar actually, who study the populations in that region of the Pacific Ocean. And that's something else that's really interesting as well, is that the population, when I was just talking about, creating these protected areas for whale sharks, it's really important that we protect these migration routes. For example, at the moment in the Galapagos, there are lots of Chinese fishing vessels there, amongst other countries, around 300 boats that are sitting right across the channel of a key whale shark migration route between Galapagos and Cocos Islands and Ecuador. So ensuring that we create these corridors that whale sharks can migrate along is really, really, really important. Yeah, just checking to see if there are any more questions. What is the approximate global population of whale sharks? We're not actually sure. But I think it was in, I want to say 2 years ago, 2018, 2017, the number of individuals that have been cited was 7,000 something. So that's not very big. I mean, obviously there will be a lot more out there than we have necessarily observed, because they are pelagic species. But a couple of years ago, the number that was ID'd in 1 year, I believe, was around 7,000. So really, when you consider that one factory in China is processing 600 a year, it is quite worrying. Thanks, guys, for all your really nice feedback. Anyone else have any more questions before I head off? Amazing. Right, in that case, yeah, thank you so much, guys, for listening today. Stay tuned, because I'm sure there's many more presentations coming. And yeah, thank you all for listening today about Adelaar and about whale sharks and about the tagging project. I am Mads, as I've said, and yeah, it was really, really nice to speak to you all today. So thank you very much.